It happened on a night like any other. The rain drummed against the window panes, a rhythmic lull that should have soothed me into relaxation. But instead, I sat motionless in my armchair, staring at my wife, Evelyn, who sat across from me on the couch. Her face was pale, her fingers laced tightly together in her lap. The flickering glow of the fireplace cast shadows over her sharp cheekbones, but nothing could mask the storm brewing behind her eyes. "He told me," she whispered, barely, audible over the rain. I knew exactly what she meant. My brother-in-law, Daniel, my own brother, had confessed his love for her. For years, we had shared holidays, laughter, and secrets. He had been my best man at our wedding. I never noticed the way he looked at her, never sensed the longing that must have been buried beneath his easy smiles. But tonight, all of that had unraveled in a single, irreversible moment. Chapter 2. The Confession. "It was after dinner," Evelyn continued, her voice shaking. "You had gone to take that phone call. He just said it. Out of nowhere. 'I love you, Evelyn, I always have.'" My pulse pounded in my ears. "And what did you say?" She hesitated. "Too long. I told him he was confused." She finally said that he needed to stop, that it was wrong. I exhaled, feeling a bitterness creep into my throat. "And then?" "He left," she whispered. "Just walked out the door. He looked devastated. A strange, nauseating mix of betrayal and anger churned inside me. My own brother." I stood abruptly. "I need to talk to him." Evelyn shot up. "No, Jack, please. He's not thinking clearly." But I was already reaching for my keys. Chapter 3. A trail of secrets. Daniel's apartment was only a few blocks away. I barely noticed the rain pelting my jacket as I knocked, then pounded on his door. No answer. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. Something wasn't right. Instinct led me to the bar we used to frequent in our younger years. And there he was, sitting in the corner, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. "You should have stayed home," Daniel murmured without looking up. "You should have kept your mouth shut," I countered, sliding into the seat across from him. He let out a humorless chuckle. "I tried. For years." Silence stretched between us, the weight of unspoken words pressing down. "You think I wanted this?" he finally said, eyes bloodshot but sincere. "You think I wanted to love the one woman I could never have?" I clenched my fists under the table. "You still had a choice." He exhaled sharply. "Do you know what it's like? Watching you two together? Seeing her look at you the way I wished she looked at me?" His voice cracked. I never planned to tell her. But tonight, I just couldn't hold it in anymore. I wanted to hate him. I should have. But there was something in his voice, in his face, that stopped me. Pain. A lifetime of it. Chapter 4. The Photograph. "You think I don't feel guilt," Daniel muttered. "But there's something you don't know." I stiffened. "What are you talking about?" He reached into his pocket and slid something across the table. A photograph. I picked it up, and the moment my eyes landed on it, my breath caught in my throat. It was Evelyn, younger, and next to her, Daniel. His arm around her waist, her hand resting on his chest. "This was before you met her," Daniel said, voice hollow. "We were together." The air seemed to be sucked from the room. "She never told me," I managed to say, my throat tight. "Because she chose you," he whispered. "She always chose you." Chapter 5. The choice. Evelyn was waiting when I returned home. "Did you find him?" she asked. I held up the photograph. Why didn't you tell me? Her eyes widened in shock, then sadness. Because it didn't matter, she said softly. Because you were the one I wanted. The past is the past, Jack. But was it? My brother had lived in silent torment. My wife had kept secrets. And I was left wondering if the love I thought was mine had always belonged to someone else. And then, Evelyn whispered something that changed everything, something that made my heart stop. Jack! Daniel isn't lying, but he's not telling you everything either. There's something else. Something I never told you. The room spun. My hands clenched. The photograph. The past was coming for us. And it wasn't finished yet. To be continued. My father had always been a man of secrets. Growing up, I learned that asking too many questions led to nothing but cryptic responses or stern warnings. But this was different. I sat in our living room, the weight of Evelyn's revelation, pressing down on me. Daniel sat across from me, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Evelyn was beside me, her hands trembling as she clutched the edges of her sweater. How do we even begin to find out the truth? I asked. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temples. Your father's careful. If he covered something up, he did it well, but I still have something that might help. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed envelope. I found this years ago after he died, Daniel admitted. It's addressed to you, Jack, but I never gave it to you because... He hesitated, because I didn't trust what was inside. My stomach tightened. And now you do? His jaw clenched. Now I don't have a choice. I took the envelope with shaky fingers. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's. The seal had already been broken, meaning Daniel had read it long before now. I shot him a sharp look before pulling out the letter. The words inside chilled me to my core. Jack, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the past is trying to claw its way back to the surface. I never wanted you to know, but perhaps now you must. Years ago, Daniel made a mistake, a grave mistake, one that could have destroyed his life. He thought it was love, but it was obsession, and it nearly cost him everything. I did what I had to do to protect him, and to protect you. If Evelyn ever comes back into your life, remember this. She was never meant to stay. Your father, Richard Calloway. The letter shook in my hands as I read it. The words were vague but dripping with menace. I looked up at Daniel. What the hell does this mean? What mistake? Daniel's face was pale, his fingers tapping anxiously on the table. I don't know. But if my past was dangerous enough for your father to intervene, we need to find out why. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. We need to go back. I turned to her. Back where? She swallowed hard. To where it all started. Back to the house where Daniel and I lived together. Chapter 11. The House of Ghosts. The drive was suffocatingly silent. The house stood at the edge of town, long abandoned but still intact. The moment we stepped inside, a chill crept down my spine. Dust blanketed every surface. The air was thick with time, frozen, waiting. Daniel led the way, his steps hesitant, as if old memories were clawing at him. We had a lot of fights here, he admitted. A lot of bad nights. Evelyn stayed close to me, her fingers grazing the walls as if touching them would stir the ghosts that still lingered. Something happened here, she murmured. Then she stopped, and I saw it too, a loose floorboard near the bedroom door. Daniel and I exchanged a glance before crouching down. With a quick pull, the board lifted, revealing a small, dust-covered metal box. Daniel's hands were shaking as he opened it. Inside was a stack of old photographs, newspaper clippings, and, at the very bottom, a police report. The headline made my breath hitch. Local woman reported missing after violent altercation. Evelyn's face turned ghostly pale. Daniel picked up one of the photographs. His hands trembled violently. It was of him. And a woman. Not Evelyn, a woman I had never seen before. Who is she? I asked. Daniel didn't answer. His breathing had turned ragged, his eyes locked on the picture as if it had just ripped open a part of his soul he had long buried. Daniel, Evelyn whispered. Who is she? He finally spoke. Her name was Lydia. Chapter 12. The Truth That Was. Buried a storm raged outside, but the true storm was in the room. Daniel sat against the wall, staring at the police report in his hands. Lydia and I dated before Evelyn, he admitted. It wasn't serious, but she was obsessed with me. She was unstable. When I tried to break things off, she threatened to ruin my life. She said if she couldn't have me, no one could. Evelyn's voice was small. What happened to her, Daniel? He swallowed hard. She disappeared. My blood turned to ice. Disappeared? Daniel nodded slowly. The last time I saw her, we had a fight. A bad one. She left and no one ever saw her again. The newspaper clippings told the rest of the story. Lydia had been reported missing. Authorities had questioned Daniel but never had. Enough evidence to charge him. The case had gone cold. And then my father had intervened. I stared at the letter again. Daniel made a mistake, a grave mistake. What did he do? I whispered. More to myself than anyone. Evelyn gasped. Look at this. She pulled out a folded piece of paper wedged beneath the police report. It was another letter, this one older, crinkled, and written in a different handwriting. Richard, I did what you asked. It's handled. No one will ever find her. But if Daniel ever starts asking questions, the letter burned in my hands. I did what you asked. It's handled. Who the hell was M? Daniel's breathing was unsteady. This doesn't make sense. If I didn't do anything to Lydia, then what the hell did your father cover up? I exhaled sharply. There's only one way to find out. We find M. Evelyn ran a finger along the edge of the paper, her eyes distant. Your father had connections, Jack. M could be anyone. Someone in law enforcement. Someone dangerous. Dangerous. The word sat between us like a loaded gun. Then Daniel stiffened. Wait. His eyes flickered with something, recognition. I think I know who M is. Chapter 14. The Name in the Dark. We left the abandoned house behind, but the past followed us like a specter. Daniel barely spoke during the drive, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Evelyn and I exchanged nervous glances, but we didn't push him. When he finally pulled up in front of a run-down mechanic shop on the outskirts of town, my pulse quickened. You think the guy who wrote that letter works here? I asked. Daniel nodded. Not just works here. He owns the place. I frowned. Who is he? Daniel turned to me. Martin Holloway. The name meant nothing to me, but the way Daniel said it, like it was laced with ghosts, made my skin crawl. Who is he? Evelyn asked. Daniel sighed. He was a friend of my father's. Back when I was younger, he was always around. I thought he was just some guy my dad helped out when he needed work. But now, I think he was something else. He didn't need to say it. Something else meant something worse. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. If anyone knows what really happened to Lydia, it's him. Chapter 15. What Lies Beneath. The moment we stepped inside, the smell of oil and metal filled my nose. The shop was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows on the cracked concrete floor. A man stood hunched over the hood of a car, his back to us. His posture was rigid, like he had already sensed us coming. Daniel cleared his throat. Martin. The man stilled. Then, slowly, he straightened and turned around. His face was lined with age, his beard streaked with gray. But his eyes, sharp, calculating, were what unsettled me most. "Didn't think I'd see you again, kid," Martin said, voice rough as gravel. His gaze flickered to me and Evelyn. "And you brought company. Interesting." Daniel took a step forward. "We need answers." Martin wiped his hands on a rag. "About what?" I held up the letter. "This." The change in his expression was almost imperceptible. But I caught it. The tightening of his jaw. The flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. "Where did you get that?" Martin asked, his voice eerily calm. Daniel didn't blink. "My father left it behind." "So tell us, Martin, what exactly did you handle for him?" Martin let out a slow breath. Then he turned, walked to his desk, and pulled open a drawer. For a brief, terrifying second, I thought he was reaching for a gun. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it onto the table. "You want answers?" he said. "Read that." I hesitated before picking it up. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges. My hands shook as I unfolded it, and then I saw the name, Lydia Holloway. My stomach dropped. "Lydia, she was your daughter?" Martin's expression darkened. "That's right." Evelyn covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" Daniel looked just as shaken. Martin, I swear I didn't." Martin held up a hand. "I know, kid. I know you didn't kill her." Silence crashed over us. I swallowed. "Then what happened to her?" Martin's gaze was unreadable. Then, after a long moment, he spoke. "Your father found out Lydia had gone missing. He knew the cops would come knocking, and he wasn't about to let his golden boy son get dragged through the mud. So he came to me." He exhaled. "Told me to fix it." Daniel's voice was hoarse. "Fix what?" Martin's eyes burned with something old and painful. "The truth." I clenched my fists. "What truth?" Martin hesitated and then, "Lydia didn't disappear," he said quietly. "She ran." The room went deathly still. Evelyn was the first to find her voice. "She's alive?" Martin nodded slowly. "That's what your father didn't want you to know. Lydia wasn't some victim. She faked her disappearance to set Daniel up. And your father knew that if the police dug too deep, they'd uncover something else. Something that could destroy your entire family." I felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under me. Daniel's voice cracked. "Where is she?" Martin's expression darkened. "That's the real question, isn't it?" Chapter 16. The Last Move. The world outside the shop was drenched in rain, but the storm inside me was worse. Lydia was alive. My father had known, and he had buried the truth to protect Daniel from something we still didn't fully understand. Evelyn clutched my arm. "Jack, if Lydia faked her disappearance, then why didn't she ever come back?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because she's hiding from something." The rain hadn't stopped. It pounded against the windshield as we drove in silence, Martin's warning ringing in our ears. Lydia was alive, and now she knew we were looking for her. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "We need to find her before she finds us." Evelyn shifted uneasily. "How do we even begin? She's been missing for years. If she wanted to stay hidden, she's done a damn good job of it." I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. "She faked her disappearance once. That means she had help. People don't just vanish without a trace." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And I know exactly where to start." We pulled into a dimly lit parking lot outside an old bar on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered above the door. "Murphy's." "Why here?" I asked. Daniel killed the engine and turned to me. "Because Lydia had a friend, someone who always cleaned up her messes." His voice was hard. And if anyone knows where she is, it's him. Chapter 18. The snake in the dark. The moment we stepped inside, the air changed. It was thick with cigarette smoke and bad decisions. The kind of place where secrets weren't spoken, only exchanged. Daniel led the way, his steps sure. He was looking for someone. Then I saw him. A man sat in the corner, nursing a glass of whiskey. Late 40s, slicked back hair, sharp eyes that flickered with recognition the second he spotted Daniel. "Well, well," the man drawled, setting down his drink. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Daniel didn't waste time. "Where is she, Alex?" Alex smirked. Straight to the point, just like old times. His eyes flickered to me and Evelyn. "You brought company. Cute." I clenched my fists. "Where is she?" Alex chuckled, shaking his head. "You think you can just walk in here after all these years and expect answers?" He leaned back. "You've got it all wrong. Lydia's not hiding." Silence. Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" Alex swirled the whiskey in his glass. "She's been watching. Waiting." His smirk widened. "She knew you'd come looking, Daniel." Daniel stiffened. "How?" Alex exhaled as if savoring the moment. Then he slid something across the table. A photograph. It was recent. And in it, Lydia was staring right at the camera. "She wanted you to find her," Alex murmured, "because she has unfinished business." Chapter 19. The House in the Woods. The address on the back of the photograph led us outside town to an old cabin buried deep in the woods. The drive felt like an eternity. No one spoke. The only sound was the occasional crackle of static from the car radio. Then we saw it. The cabin was small, weathered by time. The front door was slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. A bad feeling crawled up my spine. Daniel parked, and we stepped out cautiously. "Stay behind me," he murmured. We moved toward the entrance, every step slow, deliberate. Then, from inside, a creaking floorboard. Someone was here. I reached for the door and pushed it open. The dim light inside revealed a living room frozen in time. Dust covered the furniture, but something was off. The place wasn't abandoned. Someone had been living here. Evelyn's breath hitched. "Look!" On the table there was a stack of photographs. Of us, Daniel, me, Evelyn, even Martin. Lydia had been watching us this entire time. Then a whisper. "You finally found me." My heart stopped. We turned, and there she was, Lydia, standing in the doorway smiling. But there was something in her eyes, something wrong. Chapter 20. The Final Lie. "Lydia," Daniel whispered. She tilted her head, amusement dancing in her gaze. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I stepped forward. "You've been watching us. Why?" Her smile widened. "Because I needed you to understand." Evelyn swallowed. "Understand what?" Lydia took a slow step toward us, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That you've been looking for the wrong villain." The room seemed to tilt. Daniel shook his head. "What the hell are you talking about?" Lydia's smile faded. "You think I ran away because I was setting you up, Daniel? That I just vanished out of spite?" She exhaled. "Your father got to me first." Silence crashed over us. Daniel stiffened. "No, that's not—" "He came to me the night I left." Lydia interrupted, her voice sharp. "Told me I needed to disappear. That if I didn't, I'd end up like the others." The word sent a chill down my spine. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "Others?" Lydia's gaze darkened. "Your father wasn't protecting Daniel." Her eyes locked onto mine. "He was protecting himself." My stomach twisted. "Lydia, what are you saying?" She took another step closer. "I'm saying," she murmured, "that Richard Calloway was a murderer." The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Lydia's gaze didn't waver. Your father killed people, Jack. And when I found out, he knew I wouldn't stay quiet. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. You're lying. Lydia smiled again, but this time there was something broken in it. Am I? And then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a list, names, dates. Silence wrapped around us like a noose. My father. A killer. It didn't seem real. Daniel's hands clenched around the paper, his face pale. This can't be right. Lydia leaned against the doorframe, watching us. Oh, it's right. Your father wasn't the man you thought he was. My throat was dry. Why would he do this? She tilted her head, considering. Power, control, survival, the usual reasons. Evelyn took a shaky step forward. And you disappeared because you found out? Lydia's expression darkened. I didn't just find out. I witnessed it. The words sent a chill down my spine. I saw what he did to Martin, she continued. Your father thought he could trust him, but Martin started asking the wrong questions. He started digging. And your father, she exhaled, made sure he never found his way back out. Daniel's voice was hoarse. So you ran. Lydia nodded. And he let you take the fall, Daniel. It was easy. A missing girl. An ex-boyfriend with a temper. If I had stayed, I would have ended up like Martin. I felt my stomach churn. And now? Why come back now? Lydia's gaze locked onto mine. Because the truth is unfinished. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Your father is dead, Jack. But his secrets aren't. She pointed at the list. These names? They weren't just random people, they were liabilities. People who knew too much, and if we don't figure out why, then someone else will. A heavy silence settled between us. Daniel finally spoke, his voice raw. What are you saying? Lydia took a deep breath. I'm saying we're not the only ones looking for answers. Chapter 22. The stranger in the dark. The drive back was tense. No one spoke. The weight of the truth sat between us like a curse. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting a ghost to be following us. But I didn't need a ghost, because someone was following us. A black SUV, 2 cars behind. No plates. Tinted windows. I tightened my grip on the wheel. We're being watched. Evelyn's eyes darted to the mirror. Are you sure? Lydia didn't even turn around. Of course we are. We've been watched for a while now. Daniel stiffened. And you didn't think to mention that? Lydia smirked. Would it have changed anything? I gritted my teeth. Who the hell are they? Her expression darkened. People who don't like loose ends. I pressed harder on the gas. The SUV followed. Daniel cursed under his breath. They're not backing off. Evelyn turned, gripping the seat. Jack, we need to lose them. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark. I made a sharp turn onto a side road, tires screeching. The SUV followed. They're not just watching, I muttered. They're coming for us. Lydia pulled something from her pocket. A gun. Evelyn's eyes widened. Jesus Christ, Lydia! Lydia checked the magazine. Don't get all moral on me now, sweetheart, Daniel swore. This is insane. The SUV sped up, closer, closer. Then, headlights flashed from the side. Another car. I barely had time to react before the impact hit. Metal crunched. Glass shattered. The world spun, and then darkness. Chapter 23. The Man in the Chair Pain. It came first. A deep, aching pain that settled in my ribs, my head. I opened my eyes. Dim light. A concrete floor. The smell of gasoline and metal. I tried to move, but my wrists, tied. Panic surged through me. Hello? No answer. Then, footsteps. A door creaked. Open. A man stepped inside. Mid-50s. Sharp suit. Cold eyes. I'd never seen him before, but somehow I knew exactly who he was. "Jack Calloway," the man said, his voice smooth, measured. "We finally meet." I swallowed hard. "Who the hell are you?" The man smiled. "Someone your father owed a great deal to." My heart pounded. "You've been digging," the man continued, pacing slowly. "And you've uncovered things that should have stayed buried." I clenched my fists. "What do you want?" The man stopped. "To give you a choice." He pulled out a file and set it on the table. Inside, photographs of bodies, of places I didn't recognize. But one name stood out. Lydia Holloway. Felt my breath hitch. "What is this?" The man leaned in. "Proof that your father wasn't just a killer." He tilted his head. "He was part of something much bigger." A chill ran down my spine. "You see, Jack," he continued, "your father wasn't the mastermind. He was just a pawn." I shook my head. "That's not possible." The man smirked. "Isn't it?" He straightened. "Here's the deal. Walk away now and we forget this ever happened. No more digging, no more questions. You live." He paused. "Or you keep looking." His eyes darkened. "And you won't like what you find." I swallowed hard. "And what happens to Lydia? To Daniel? To Evelyn?" The man sighed, almost disappointed. "That depends on you." Silence. My father had been hiding something bigger than just his own sins, something deeper, something worse, and now I was standing at the edge of the abyss. The man adjusted his cuffs. "So, Jack, what's it going to be?" My pulse thundered in my ears. I had a choice to make. The man's cold gaze bore into me, waiting. Walk away, and we all live. Keep digging, and... well, I swallowed hard. "What if I say no?" The man sighed, almost like he expected my stubbornness. "Then things get unpleasant." He slid another photograph in front of me. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was Evelyn. Bound. Unconscious. My hands clenched into fists. "You son of a..." He raised a hand. "Careful, Jack. You're playing a game you don't understand." I gritted my teeth. "Where is she?" He smiled. "Safe, for now." I lunged forward, but the ropes cut into my wrists. The man didn't flinch. "You think you're the first person to try and take down what your father was a part of?" He shook his head. "You're just another naive idiot who thinks he's the hero of the story." I kept my voice steady. "And what story is this?" His smile widened. "The one where your father sold his soul to the wrong people." Chapter 25. The Man. My father was the man, whoever he was, walked to the other side of the dimly lit room and poured himself a drink. "Your father was useful," he mused. "For a time. He knew how to keep secrets, how to clean up problems." He glanced at me. "Until he became one." My stomach churned. "Who killed him?" He chuckled. "Does it matter?" I clenched my fists. "It does. To me." He took a slow sip of his drink, considering. "Your father wasn't innocent." "But he wasn't the mastermind either. He was protecting something." I swallowed hard. "What?" He placed his glass down. "A ledger." My pulse quickened. "A ledger?" "Your father kept records. Names, payments, dates, everything. And if that ledger ever saw the light of day..." He let out a low whistle. "A lot of very powerful people would burn." I exhaled. This was bigger than I thought. "You want it," I murmured. The man smirked. "Smart boy." I forced my breathing to slow. If this ledger was real, it was my only leverage, and I had a damn good idea where it might be. Chapter 26. The escape. I had to get out. Evelyn was in danger. Lydia and Daniel. Who knew if they were still safe? I tugged at the ropes, testing their strength. The man watched me, amused. Struggling won't get you far. I ignored him. I needed time, a distraction. I glanced at his drink. How'd you do it? His brow arched. Do what? Kill my father. His smirk faltered. You think I killed him? He laughed. No, Jack. Your father was taken out by someone much closer to home. Something cold ran down my spine. Someone closer to home? The realization hit me like a freight train. Lydia. She had been watching us. She had disappeared for years. She had known things she shouldn't have. Had she killed my father? I didn't get to ask. Because at that moment, the lights exploded. A deafening crash echoed as the door slammed open, and a shadow moved in the chaos. Gunfire. Shouting. Then, hands on me. Cutting the ropes! Move! Daniel. We sprinted through the dark down a narrow hallway. Where's Evelyn? I shouted. Safe, Daniel panted. For now. Bullets ricocheted off the walls. I ducked, following Daniel through a side door, and then air. Cold, fresh air. We were outside. Get in, Lydia's voice snapped. I turned. She was behind the wheel of a black SUV, engine roaring. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself inside, Daniel right behind me. Lydia slammed the gas. The tires screamed as we tore down the road. The men were behind us, but we were free. For now. We drove, in silence. My mind raced. Lydia, I finally said. Did you kill my father? Her grip on the wheel tightened. Do you really want the answer to that? I did, and I didn't. Daniel exhaled. We need to talk. No more secrets. Lydia pulled off the road into an abandoned gas station. She killed the engine, staring ahead. Finally, she spoke. I didn't kill him, she murmured. But I know who did. I swallowed hard. Who? She turned to me, her eyes sharp. Your mother. Silence. The words hit like a sledgehammer. What? I breathed. Lydia leaned back. Your mother knew everything, Jack. She knew about the ledger, the secrets, the deals your father made. My chest felt tight. No, that's not... Wake up, Lydia snapped. Your father was going to turn on them. He was going to expose everything. And she couldn't let that happen. My vision blurred. She made the call, Lydia whispered. She signed the order. Your father died because she wanted him to. Daniel exhaled sharply. Evelyn was quiet, but I could feel her gaze on me. I wanted to. Deny it! I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, but deep down, I knew it was. My father had been many things. A liar, a criminal, a man full of secrets. But my mother, she was the one who had buried him. Chapter 28. No way out. The realization settled over me like a storm cloud. My mother, I murmured. She's the one pulling the strings. Lydia nodded. And she's not done yet. Daniel clenched his jaw. She'll come for us. She already has, Lydia whispered. Evelyn finally spoke. What do we do? I exhaled. My father had spent his life protecting secrets, but me, I was going to expose them. We end this, I said. The fire roared, eating through the ledger like a starving beast. Ash drifted through the air, carrying with it the secrets my father had died for. My mother didn't flinch. She simply watched, her lips pressed into a thin line. You think that changes anything? She said, her voice calm. Burning the ledger doesn't erase the truth. I stepped forward. No, but now no one controls it. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. Good. I'd finally rattled her. Lydia groaned, clutching her side. Daniel was pressing his jacket against the wound, his hands slick with blood. We need to get her out of here, Evelyn whispered. My mother tilted her head, considering us. Then, to my horror, she smiled. "You still don't get it, do you, Jack?" She took another step forward, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. "I don't need the ledger. I am the ledger. Everything your father knew, everything he kept hidden, I was the one who fed him that information." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "You destroyed proof. Yes," she continued. "But now, you're the last piece of evidence left." A chill crawled up my spine. Evelyn whispered, "Jack, we need to go." I knew she was right, but my mother wasn't done. "You've made your choice," she said, her voice eerily soft. "Now I'll make mine." She turned to the men beside her. "Kill them all." Chapter 35. A Desperate Escape. The first shot rang out. I grabbed Evelyn and threw her behind a stack of crates as bullets tore through the storage unit. Daniel fired back, dragging Lydia. "Toward the exit. Lydia, stay with me," he shouted. She coughed, her breath ragged. "I've had worse." Liar. I peeked out. My mother was gone. She never planned on getting her hands dirty. Typical. Evelyn tugged my arm. "Jack, move!" We sprinted for the back exit, dodging gunfire. The moment we burst outside, the cold air hit us. Like a slap. Daniel shoved Lydia into the SUV. I jumped into the driver's seat and floored it. Tires screeched. Bullets shattered the back windshield. Then, silence. The storage facility disappeared behind us, swallowed by the darkness. Chapter 36. A Plan of Our Own. We didn't stop driving until we reached an abandoned motel on the outskirts of town. Inside, Lydia collapsed onto the bed, her face pale. Daniel worked quickly, stitching her wound with practiced hands. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. The ledger was gone. But the war was just beginning. Evelyn sat beside me. "What do we do now?" I exhaled. "We hit back." Daniel scoffed. "Hit back? Against your mother? Do you have any idea who she is?" I met his gaze. "Yeah, she's the most dangerous woman in the city." Lydia winced as she sat up. "And she just put a kill order on you, Jack. On all of us." I knew that. And yet, I wasn't scared. I was angry. "My father spent his whole life working for them," I said. "Then he tried to break free and they killed him. Now my mother's taken his place." I looked at them all. Lydia, pale but still sharp. Daniel, furious and ready. Evelyn, scared but unwavering. "If we don't stop her," I continued, "she'll never stop coming for us." Silence. Then Lydia smirked. "So what's the plan?" "Boss?" I thought for a moment. Then I said the words that sealed our fate. "We take everything from her." Chapter 37. The spider's web, we had one advantage. My mother didn't think we could fight back. She was wrong. Lydia hacked into her financial records. Daniel made some calls to old contacts, dirty cops, former or allies of my father, people who wanted my mother out of power. Evelyn reached out to a journalist she trusted. Piece by piece, we built our case. My mother's empire was vast, but every empire had weak points. We just had to find them. Then, we'd strike, and this time, we wouldn't miss. To be continued. We had one shot. My mother had spent decades weaving her web, pulling strings, eliminating threats. But she had one weakness: control. She needed to be the one pulling the levers, making the decisions. So what happened when we made a move she didn't expect? She panicked, and people like her made mistakes when they panicked. Lydia's voice crackled in my earpiece. "We're in position." Daniel was stationed outside my mother's estate, watching her security. Evelyn sat beside me in the car, laptop, balanced on her knees, tracking movement inside. I exhaled. "Then let's get started." Lydia hit the switch, and the lights inside my mother's house went out. Chapter 39. Breaking the Queen, The mansion plunged into darkness. Seconds later, we heard the alarm screaming through the night. Panic, confusion, chaos. "Security's scrambling," Daniel whispered. "They don't know what's happening." Perfect. I slipped out of the car and moved toward the house. The back entrance was unguarded, just like we planned. Evelyn's voice came through my earpiece. "Jack, you have 60 seconds before the backup generator kicks in." I sprinted inside. The house was eerily silent except for the distant sound of shouting. I moved fast, slipping through the hallways, heading for my mother's office. The door was locked, not a problem. I pulled a small charge from my pocket, pressed it against the lock, and boom! The door swung open, smoke curling from the shattered handle. I stepped inside. There, sitting on the desk, was what I came for. A black flash drive. Lydia had found traces of it in my mother's encrypted files. A backup of everything. Transactions, names, deals. If we leaked this, it wouldn't just ruin her, it would bring down an empire. I grabbed it and turned, and came face to face with my mother. Chapter 40. The final choice. She stood in the doorway, calm as ever, a pistol in her hand. "Jack," she murmured, "you've been very busy." I didn't move. "You can't stop this," she continued, taking a slow step forward. "You think you're exposing some grand conspiracy? You're just burning yourself alive." I clenched my fists. "You killed Dad." She sighed. "Your father was a liability, just like you are." I raised the flash drive. "This ends tonight," she smiled. "No, Jack. You end tonight." She raised the gun and fired. Chapter 41. The last betrayal pain exploded in my shoulder. I staggered back, gripping the wound, but before she could. Fire again! Another gunshot, her body jerked. Blood bloomed across her chest. She blinked, surprised. Then she collapsed. I looked past her. Evelyn stood in the hallway, gun trembling in her hands, eyes wide with shock. She had shot my mother. She had saved me. I exhaled, pain crashing over me. "We need to go." Evelyn hesitated, staring at my mother's motionless body. "Now, Ev!" She snapped out of it. Together, we ran. Chapter 42. The End of an Empire. We didn't stop until we were miles away. Lydia uploaded the files. Daniel made the calls, and then the world burned. By morning, news stations were flooded with reports. Corruption, murders, money laundering. Names were named, arrests were made, and my mother's empire crumbled. Epilogue, a new beginning. We disappeared after that. Changed names. Left the city. We had won, but at a cost. My mother was dead. Lydia still carried the scar from that bullet. And Evelyn, she never forgave herself for pulling the trigger. As for me, I finally understood. My father had spent his life trying to escape the darkness. I had spent mine trying to destroy it. But in the end, the truth was simple. You don't escape the darkness. You just learn to live in it. The end. Months had passed since we brought down my mother's empire. The world had moved on, but the scars we'd left behind hadn't healed. The quiet life we'd fled to felt like a hollow shell, beautiful, peaceful, but empty. I couldn't escape. The constant weight of what had happened. Every shadow seemed to whisper the name of the family I had burned. Every phone call felt like a risk. Every knock on the door a potential death sentence. Lydia, Daniel, and Evelyn had gone their separate ways, each carrying their own burdens. But I stayed behind, alone. One night, as I sat on the porch, nursing a glass of bourbon, I saw headlights cutting through the darkness. A figure stepped out of the car. I knew that walk. It was her. Chapter 44. The Unseen Hand. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. I opened the door to find my mother's most trusted ally standing there. Lena. Lena was always the one who worked in the shadows, the one who cleaned up the mess. The woman no one could trust, but everyone had to rely on. She hadn't changed much, though the years had hardened her. Her sharp eyes locked onto mine as she stepped past me, brushing her hand against my shoulder in a gesture I hadn't expected. "You look like hell," she said, her voice as cool as ever. I didn't respond. Instead, I motioned for her to sit. "You were expecting me?" she asked, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "No," I said, my voice clipped. "But I guess you're here. Now!" She took a seat, eyes scanning the room. Her fingers tapped the table in a rhythm only she knew. "You thought it was over, didn't you?" I didn't move. "I thought you were loyal to my mother." Her laugh was sharp. "Loyalty is a currency, Jack, and like everything else, it has its price." I leaned back in my chair. "So what are you here for?" Her eyes glittered. "I'm here to offer you a deal. The real deal." Chapter 45. The Proposal. I raised an eyebrow. "You know I'm not interested in anything you have to offer." Lena's smile didn't falter. "You should be. My mother may have been the face, but there's always someone else pulling the strings. Your mother was just a part of the bigger picture. You've seen that, haven't you?" I didn't answer. But she was right. The people who funded her, who helped her build that empire, are still out there, Jack. And now, they have a new problem. "They have you," I bristled. "What are you suggesting?" Lena leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "You want your revenge, don't you? You want to finish what your father started?" I gritted my teeth, the anger rising again. "What do you want from me?" She slid a folder across the table, its contents sealed with a single red stamp. "The men who ruined your family. The ones your mother answered to. They're still operating in the shadows, pulling strings. We can take them down, but we need someone who knows how to fight their fight. Someone like you." I opened the folder. Inside were names, faces, locations, the people who had financed everything, who had corrupted everything. Lena was right. The war hadn't ended. It had only just begun. Chapter 46. The Choice. I stared at the folder for what felt like hours. My entire life had been shaped by lies, by people pulling strings behind the scenes. My father, my mother, and now, these men. I had a choice. Take the easy route, disappear, live a quiet life, forget everything, or go after them, finish what I started. Rage surged again, hotter than ever. My fingers tightened around the folder. The blood of my family, the weight of the legacy they left me. It all came crashing down in that moment. I looked at Lena. "What's your angle in all of this?" She smiled again, that same cold, calculating smile. "I'm tired of being a puppet." "I'm ready to cut the strings." I exhaled, and then, with a steely resolve, I made my decision. I'm in. Lena's smile widened, but it wasn't one of victory. It was a predator's smile. Good. And just like that, the game was back on. Chapter 47. The Darkness Closes. And the plan wasn't just about taking down a few men. It was about dismantling the entire network, the vast, intricate web of corruption that stretched far beyond what I could have imagined. Lena had resources, she had connections, but most importantly, she knew how to move in the dark. Together we started pulling on the threads. We made moves, sending messages, leaking information to the right people. Every move was calculated. Every person in the chain, every pawn, was a potential ally or an enemy. And with every step, I realized something I hadn't before. There was no escape from this world. There was only survival, and I was ready to play. For keeps. Chapter 48. The Final Act. The final confrontation loomed, but it wouldn't just be a fight for power. It would be a battle for something far more dangerous, for truth, for justice, and for the family I never really knew. The clock was ticking, and this time, there would be no second chances. To be continued. Lena and I had no intention of fighting the shadows one piece at a time. We weren't going to crawl our way through the labyrinth of corruption. We were going to tear it down. The first strike was quick, precise. Lena fed me intel about the hidden holdings of the men who had once controlled my mother. These men, the syndicate, were powerful, untouchable. Until now, we leaked their financials to every media outlet we could. Stocks plummeted, public trust evaporated, the underworld trembled. The men who had once operated with impunity were now scrambling to cover their tracks. But it wasn't enough. I needed to face them, the ones who controlled everything from the shadows, the ones who still thought they were invincible. Chapter 50. The gathering. Storm Lena arranged the meeting. It was the perfect setup, risky but necessary. The syndicate had an underground facility, a fortress hidden beneath layers of false fronts. The meeting was scheduled for midnight. The place was abandoned, decrepit, a forgotten part of the city. I stood with Lena and a small team of trusted allies. My heart was beating fast, but my mind was focused. The syndicate had always been an entity, a ghost. Tonight, I would meet the men who had kept their hands clean while others bled. Lena spoke quietly, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. They know you're coming. They'll be prepared, but they don't know that we're one step ahead. I nodded, my voice low. Let's finish it. Chapter 51. The Man Behind the Curtain. We entered through a narrow corridor, the walls slick with moisture, the air heavy with dust. It felt like walking into the belly of a beast. The elevator doors opened with a soft, mechanical hiss. We descended into the underground complex. I had no idea what to expect, but the tension in the air was thick. It was a power play. Who would blink first? Lena led the way, her demeanor calm but intense. They'll try to bait you, Jack. Don't fall for it. We passed guards, each one nodding at Lena. She was known here. That fact alone made my skin crawl. Finally, we reached a large, unmarked door. Lena knocked once, and it opened to reveal a dimly lit room, long shadows cast by a massive round table. At the table sat 3 men, the syndicate, the faces that had haunted my family for years. Each of them was a titan in their own right, business moguls, politicians, and criminal masterminds, who had all played the game in their own way. But now, the game had shifted. They were no longer in control. I was. I stepped forward, the weight of the moment crashing down. The leader of the syndicate, Elijah Dorn, the man who had controlled the majority of the empire my mother had built, looked up from his seat. He was older, his face marked by years of indulgence. But his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Jack," he said, his voice a smooth, dangerous drawl. "I have to admit, I didn't expect you to come to the table." I met his gaze, unwavering. "I'm not here for a seat at the table. I'm here to end the game." Lena moved to the side, her expression unreadable. The other 2 men at the table, Victor Harrow and Rafael Cruz, didn't flinch. But I could see the fear flickering in their eyes. They weren't used to being confronted. "You don't even know who you're dealing with, Jack," Elijah continued, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "The power we have is untouchable. You've played your hand, but you're still a pawn." I didn't flinch. "Then I'll burn the whole damn board." Chapter 52. The Revelation. Elijah's smile disappeared. He stood slowly, his hands resting on the back of his chair. "You've been asking the wrong questions, Jack," he said, his voice low. Your mother didn't just work for us. She was one of us. The real question is, what happened to you? I froze. What are you talking about? You're not like your father, Elijah said. You never were. You're smarter, more ruthless. But you've always been out of the loop. Your mother kept you in the dark. She thought you were the next in line. Enough, I spat. What are you getting at? He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You don't know why your father was killed, do you? The words hit me like a punch. My heart raced. What do you mean? I demanded. You see, Jack, Elijah said, his voice almost a whisper, your father didn't try to escape the syndicate. He was going to expose us. He was planning to take everything down, including your mother. I took a step back, my mind whirling. No, that's not possible. Your father was the real threat, and your mother knew it. That's why she had him silenced. And now you're just a loose end. But the real question is, what do you want to do with the power you've inherited? It was a revelation I wasn't ready for. My father hadn't been a victim of a betrayal. He had been a traitor. My mother had killed him to protect the empire, to protect her place in the syndicate. And now, the truth was in front of me. The game had changed, but the rules were still the same. The chaos inside the bar was electric, like the air before a storm. Lena's men circled me, but they didn't know me. They didn't know the strength that had been building inside of me for years. The rage, the betrayal, the hunger for revenge. I was no longer the pawn in their game. I was the king. I moved swiftly, striking with precision. One of Lena's men lunged at me with a knife, but I twisted his arm, forcing him to the ground. The others hesitated for a split second, unsure of what they were facing. That hesitation was all I needed. I took them down one by one, my body moving like a machine, each movement fluid and deliberate. The sounds of struggle filled the air. The sickening thud of punches landing, the desperate grunts of men trying to regain control, but they couldn't stop me. Lena stood off to the side, her arms crossed, watching with that same calculating look in her eyes. She was waiting for me to make the final mistake. She thought she had already won, but she had underestimated me. I paused for a moment, locking eyes with her across the room. The last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. She had always wanted to manipulate me, control me, use me as a pawn to further her own rise, but she hadn't counted on my ability to break free. Game's over, Lena, I said, my voice steady. Her lips twitched in something like a smile. Is it, Jack? You think you can stop all of this? You think you can just walk away and make everything better? I didn't answer her. Instead, I took the final steps toward her. Every ounce of anger I had felt, every betrayal, every lie, burned in my chest, fueling my movements. When I reached her, I stopped just inches away. For a moment, the world felt like it was holding its breath. Then I grabbed her by the wrist, my grip tight, unwavering. You're done, I said. Her eyes flickered with something between disbelief and admiration. She was defeated, but still dangerous in her own way. You'll regret this, Jack. They'll never let you take control. I ignored her, my focus now entirely on taking back what had been stolen from me. The syndicate, the empire, was mine to destroy. Chapter 60. The Power Struggle. The door to the bar opened again, and a new group of figures stepped inside. They weren't Lena's men. They weren't anyone I had expected. They were the syndicate's true leaders, the ones who had been pulling strings from the shadows all along. I could see it in their eyes. They didn't expect me to be here. They didn't expect me to survive. But they had underestimated me, just like Lena had. As they stepped into the room, I recognized one of them, Lucius Valente, a name I'd heard whispered among those who knew about the underworld. He was the ghost behind the throne, the one who controlled everything from the darkness. You think you've won, Jack? Lucius's voice was smooth, almost comforting, but it sent a shiver down my spine. This empire doesn't fall with a single punch. You think you can take over what we've spent years building? I smirked, letting go of Lena and standing tall. I don't need to take over, Lucius. I'm going to burn it to the ground. Lucius stepped forward, his cold eyes scanning me with disdain. You don't even know what you're up against. Tell me, I said, my voice hard. What exactly am I up against? Lucius smiled. You're up against us. Chapter 61. The dance of deceit, it wasn't just a fight for power anymore. This was war. The syndicate had been a carefully crafted empire, built on secrecy, manipulation, and control. And now that empire was at its breaking point. I couldn't let it fall into their hands again. Not after everything I had fought for. Lena had been the first obstacle, but now the real game began. Lucius Valente was no fool. He knew how to play this game, how to maneuver, how to stay in control. And if I was going to take him down, I had to think beyond the simple physical confrontation. We're not finished, Jack, Lucius said, his voice barely above a whisper. You may have taken down Lena, but you're still a child. You have no idea the forces you're dealing with. But I had learned something during my time in this world. Power wasn't just about strength, it was about knowledge, about being able to see the game in its entirety. Who controlled the pieces, who moved when, and who could be trusted. I'm not a child anymore, I said. And I'm not afraid of you. His smile faltered for a moment, then returned with renewed intensity. Then let's see how long that confidence lasts. Chapter 62. The secret in the shadows. I didn't have much time. Lucius and his associates were already formulating their next move, and I needed to be ahead of them. Lena had underestimated me, but Lucius wasn't making the same mistake. I turned to my team, my trusted allies, who had stood by me despite everything. They were still shaken by the events in the bar, but they had proven themselves. We're not running anymore, I said, my voice firm. We're going after them. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city as I stood in front of the building that had once been the heart of the syndicate's power. Now, it was nothing more than a shell, a monument to the empire that had risen and fallen under, the weight of its own greed and ambition. The last phase of my plan was in motion. The pieces were finally where they needed to be. Lena had been dealt with. Lucius was on the edge of losing control of the empire, and his people, his loyalists, were beginning to turn against him. I looked over my shoulder, meeting the eyes of my closest allies. They were ready. They had stood by me, fought alongside me, and now they were the ones who would help me burn this empire to the ground. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance. The city was waking up to the consequences of the syndicate's power, and soon they would feel the aftershocks of the chaos that had been set in motion. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was taking everything back, reclaiming the control that had been ripped away from me years ago. It was over. The doors to the building burst open, and the last of Lucius's loyalists stepped out, ready to face whatever was coming. For them. But they didn't expect me. They didn't expect the storm that was about to hit them. I could see the fear in their eyes as they realized they had been outmaneuvered. It was a game they couldn't win. Their leader was already defeated, and their empire was crumbling around them. They were nothing more than remnants of a broken dream. Your time is over, I said, stepping forward. The words were a promise, a warning. Chapter 65. The final showdown. Lucius Valente appeared at the top of the staircase, his cold eyes locking onto mine. He looked more fragile than I remembered, his once unshakable confidence shattered by the reality of his impending defeat. You think you've won? Lucius's voice was a low growl, but there was a hint of desperation beneath the surface. You don't understand what you're up against. You think you can just tear down everything we've built? You think you can take control and make it all yours? I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving his. What I'm doing, Lucius, is giving the world a chance. The syndicate's time is over. The power you've hoarded, it's gone. You're nothing. Lucius sneered, but there was no conviction in his expression. He was beaten, and he knew it. The empire he had spent decades constructing was falling apart in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I've been playing the game longer than you, he said, his voice barely audible. You may have won this round, but in the end, the game always wins. I smiled coldly. Not this time. In that moment, I understood the truth of it all. The syndicate, the power struggle, the lies. They had all been part of a system that was destined to fail. It wasn't about winning a single battle or taking control of a single empire. It was about breaking the cycle. And now, I was the one holding the cards. Chapter 66. The turning point. As Lucius's last supporters began to scatter, it became clear. The syndicate had lost. Their power was no longer a force to be reckoned with. The truth, the corruption that had run through its veins, had been exposed, and the city was waking up to the chaos they had caused. But I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The next phase of the plan was to rebuild. Not just the city, but everything that had been broken. I had seen what the syndicate had done to this world. I had lived in the shadows of their empire long enough. It was time for something new, something better. I turned to my allies, the ones who had fought beside me through it all. This isn't just about taking power. This is about creating something that doesn't destroy the world around it. We build something better, something stronger. We give the city a chance to heal. They nodded in agreement, their faces a mixture of determination and relief. We had come a long way. We had fought the darkest corners of this world and emerged victorious. But this was just the beginning. I glanced at Lena, who stood in the corner of the room, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and admiration. I could still see the hunger for power in her, the same ambition that had driven her to betray me. But that ambition was no longer something I feared. It was something I could use, something to shape the future. You may have lost today, Lena, I said softly. But there's always a place for you in this new world. If you can let go of your old ways. She didn't answer, but her expression shifted, the coldness melting into something resembling curiosity. For a moment, I saw the woman who had been my ally, the woman who had helped me, even if her motives had been unclear. But I wasn't going to trust her again. Not yet. As the city began to stabilize, I knew there would be challenges ahead. There were still remnants of the syndicate. The city was still buzzing with the aftermath of the syndicate's collapse, its pulse erratic, almost as if it were taking its first breath after years of suffocation. Every corner, every street whispered of change, the air thick with the scent of uncertainty and possibility. In the weeks following the fall, the city had begun to rebuild, but nothing would be the same. I walked through the streets, my presence known but unnoticed. To the outside world, I was just another man passing by, but in the depths of the shadows, my name was beginning to carry weight. I had become both a symbol and a force of change, a phoenix rising from the ashes of a crumbling empire. The old city felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. And so was I. Lena, still lingering in the fringes of the world I had dismantled, had yet to make a move. I knew her too well. She was waiting, watching, calculating. But the game had changed, and I wasn't about to let her play it anymore. She had burned her bridges, and yet a part of me couldn't help but wonder, would she ever come for me again? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. If she tried, I would be ready. Chapter 69. The shadow of the past days turned into weeks. The fallout from the syndicate's crumbling empire rippled out, reaching every corner of the city. Old alliances were severed. New ones were formed, and for once, it felt like the balance of power had shifted in favor of the people. But there was still the looming question of who would fill the vacuum. Lucius, his empire in ruins, had disappeared, without a trace. A shadow in the wind. The thought of him retreating to the shadows made me uneasy. There were few things more dangerous than a cornered animal, and Lucius had always been an animal. But with him out of sight, I focused on the immediate, rebuilding, reorganizing, and securing the future. But it was Lena who remained on my mind. It wasn't just the past that connected us, but the weight of the betrayal, the wounds she had inflicted. I didn't trust her. Not anymore. But I had to admit something I hadn't wanted to face. I understood her. Her hunger for power. Her calculated manipulations. They weren't so different from my own when I first entered the game. She wasn't just a threat. She was a reflection of the ambition that had once consumed me. The only difference was that I had learned to break free from it. She hadn't yet. But that didn't mean she was lost. Not entirely. Chapter 70. A meeting in the dark. I sat in the quiet of my office late one night, the city lights filtering through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. I had a few trusted people working under me now, individuals who shared the same vision of creating something new, something better. But even as I worked, there was a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, a sense that something was coming. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, my voice steady but curious. The door opened, and to my surprise, it wasn't one of my associates. It was Lena. She stepped inside, her eyes cold but calculating, the same as I remembered. But there was something else there now, something I hadn't expected. She wasn't here to fight. She was here to talk. "I figured you'd come to me eventually," I said, standing up slowly. "You always did like to have the last word." Her lips twitched into a half smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You always had a knack for underestimating me, Jack. But I suppose that's not your biggest flaw." I raised an eyebrow. "You've come all this way to give me a critique?" "No," she said, her voice low, almost resigned. "I've come because I need you." I crossed my arms, wary. "You need me? For what?" Her gaze didn't falter. "You're not the only one who's been burned by the syndicate's fall. They've taken everything from me just like they took everything from you, but I'm not ready to give up. Not yet. And I know you're not either." I took a step closer, keeping my distance. "You think you can still control this world? After everything you've done?" "I'm not asking to control it, Jack," she replied, her voice hardening. "I'm asking for a chance. I want to help you take Lucius down. The city needs to be put back in balance, and the syndicate wasn't the answer. But you could be." Her words hung in the air like a dare. She was offering me an alliance, a partnership of sorts, built on shared history and mutual enemies, and yet I knew better than to trust her. But there was also something else. A part of me that couldn't quite let go of the idea of who we had been, the people we had once been. The fire that had burned between us. That was something neither of us could forget. But trust? That was a different matter entirely. "What's in it for you?" I asked, my tone sharp. She met my gaze without flinching. "Survival. Nothing more. Nothing less." I was silent for a moment, weighing the offer. The silence between Lena and me in the weeks that followed was palpable. We had agreed to an alliance, but every conversation, every plan we made was wrapped in layers of suspicion and caution. It wasn't just about the future of the city anymore. It was about our past. It was about the trust we had once shared, the betrayals, and the lingering tension that still simmered between us. I couldn't deny that, in a way, this partnership made sense. We both had our reasons for wanting Lucius gone, and together, we could pull the threads of the syndicate apart faster than either of us could alone. But there was always the question in the back of my mind. How long would it take before she betrayed me again? Lena had proven to be ruthless when it suited her. She had played me, used me, and now she was in my orbit once again. The old patterns had to be carefully watched. I could feel it in the air, the tension, but there was also something else, an unspoken understanding that we both needed to succeed. If we were to take Lucius down, the rules of the game would have to change, and I would need to outsmart her every step of the way. Chapter 73. The web of lies. Lena had always been a master of manipulation, and now I found myself walking a fine line. She knew the city, the players, and the secrets better than anyone. But I knew Lucius. I knew the underworld's pulse, its veins and arteries. I could feel the chaos that had been seeded under his rule, and now that it was unraveling, the scars were visible. I could almost hear Lucius's footsteps in the shadows, waiting to pounce, to reclaim control. But this time he didn't have the upper hand. I wasn't the same naive man who had once trusted Lena. I was no longer the outsider in this game. I had become part of the machinery, the engine. We began to plan, strategically, slowly, meticulously. Lena and I sat in rooms full of maps, intelligence, and resources we had gathered. But there was a quiet tension in those meetings. Every word spoken felt like a calculated move, every glance exchanged, charged, as though we were playing a game of chess, each waiting for the other to make a wrong move. I didn't trust her, but I also knew, without her, Lucius's network would be impenetrable. She was my doorway into the last bastion of his empire. Chapter 74. A glimpse of the past. It was during one of our late-night meetings that the past finally broke through the barriers we had carefully built. It was subtle at first. Lena's voice, a little softer, her eyes a little more vulnerable. "You ever think about what we were?" she asked, the question hanging between us. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. It was easy to forget what we had once been, a time before the betrayals, the backstabbing, and the power games, but I couldn't deny the weight of it. She had been a part of me, a fire in my life, and for a time we had burned brightly together. "I think about it every day," I said, the truth of it coming out before I could stop it. She studied me for a long moment, then gave a small, almost sad smile. "We were good together, weren't we?" I didn't respond. There was no need. The ghosts of our pasts were far too complicated to put into words. We had been good once, but good had become a dangerous word between us. Trust had become a currency neither of us could afford. "Lucius." I changed the subject. "He won't go down easily. He'll see this coming." She nodded. "We have to move fast then." And just like that, the moment was gone. The games resumed. The past remained locked behind walls we couldn't tear down. Chapter 75. The Gathering Storm. The plan was simple. Strike fast, hit hard, and take out Lucius's most loyal followers. His empire was too fractured for him to hold it together any longer, but he was still dangerous. He had connections in the highest places, allies in politics, law enforcement, and every corner of the criminal underworld. But I had something he didn't. I had learned the game. Lena had her own network, old allies, remnants of the syndicate's former glory, and we used them to gather intel. Slowly but surely, we began to infiltrate Lucius's safe houses, cut off his resources, and dismantle his power from the inside. But there were always surprises. Always things we couldn't predict. One night, we received word that Lucius was planning a counterattack. He had grown desperate, but desperation was a dangerous thing. We were close, too close to let anything slip through our fingers now. The stakes were higher than ever. Chapter 76. The Betrayal. It happened faster than I could have imagined. I walked into the safe house late one night, expecting to find Lena ready for the next phase of our plan. Instead, I was greeted by a scene that made my blood run cold. Lena stood at the center of the room, surrounded by Lucius's men, people I thought we had already neutralized. Her eyes met mine, and there was no hint of surprise, no hesitation. The chaos unfolded in a blur. Lena's face, usually so composed, twisted into a mask of disbelief as my people, my real allies, closed in around the room. The betrayal, so carefully orchestrated, had been undone in an instant. Lucius's men, caught in the crossfire of my final move, scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. I had always known that in this game, the moment you underestimated your opponent was the moment you lost, and now, Lena had made that mistake. She had believed I was playing the same way, on the same terms. But I had learned long ago that to survive, you had to adapt. And I had adapted. Lena's eyes met mine one last time. The betrayal was now crystal, clear, but there was no anger, no regret in her gaze. Only calculating resolve. "You think you've won, Jack?" she asked, her voice low, almost amused. "This is just the beginning. Lucius won't be taken down this easily." "I don't need to take him down, Lena," I replied, my voice steady but filled with a quiet certainty. "He's already lost. His empire is falling apart, and the people have already turned on him." The room seemed to fall silent for a moment, the realization settling in. Lucius's empire, once an impenetrable fortress, was now crumbling from the inside out. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of something else. Chapter 79. The Shattered Alliance. As the dust settled, I could see Lena's mind racing. She was calculating her next move, trying to figure out how she could salvage something from this situation. But I knew her too well. She was trapped. Her ties to Lucius had been severed, and her role in the syndicate had been exposed. She stepped back, raising her hands in mock surrender. "You were always the better strategist, Jack. I'll give you that, but don't think you've won just because you've stopped me." I took a step forward, my eyes never leaving hers. "It's not about winning or losing anymore, Lena. It's about survival. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with them." For a long moment she said nothing, simply staring at me as though weighing her options. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. But I knew this wasn't the last time I'd see her. Lena was never one to accept defeat, not truly. She would retreat, regroup, and come back stronger than ever. But I was ready for that. I had no illusions about what she was capable of, and I knew she would be lurking in the shadows, waiting for her next opportunity. I watched her leave, but instead of feeling a sense of relief, I felt something else, a quiet unease. This battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Chapter 80. The Reckoning. The city was buzzing again, but this time it wasn't with the usual whispers of power and corruption. No, now there was a palpable shift in the air. The Syndicate was all but destroyed, and Lucius, for the first time in years, was vulnerable. But that didn't mean he was gone. He was still a force to be reckoned with, and I knew better than to assume that he would simply fade into the background. As I sat in my office, watching the city below, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. Lucius's downfall was just a piece of the puzzle. The real challenge lay ahead. I picked up my phone and made a call. It was time to take control. There were pieces of the syndicate still in play, and I needed to make sure that the new order wasn't built on the same lies, the same manipulations that had once fueled the old empire. "Make the arrangements," I said into the phone. "It's time for the final piece to fall." Chapter 81. The Phoenix Reborn. The city's skyline was slowly changing. The old world was crumbling, and in its place, something new was being forged. The power structure was shifting, but it wasn't going to be another empire of fear or manipulation. This time, I was building something different, a system where the people had a voice, where power didn't corrupt, but uplifted. The pieces were moving into place, but it wasn't easy. The remnants of Lucius's allies, those who still believed in his vision, were regrouping, plotting their next move. And Lena, always lurking in the shadows, was waiting. I had made it this far by trusting no one but myself, but now I was forced to rely on others. There was too much at stake for me to do it alone. I watched the horizon as the sun dipped below the city's edge. The sky was a brilliant mix of red and gold, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and though the journey ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I would not be undone again. Chapter 82. The final decision. It was an unexpected call that shifted everything once more. Jack, the voice on the other end said, calm but with an edge of urgency. It's happening. Lucius is preparing to make his final stand. I hung up without a word. The time for half measures was over. Lucius was desperate. For a while, there was peace. The city, once a dark labyrinth of power and manipulation, seemed to breathe easier, as if the weight of the old world had finally been lifted. It wasn't perfect. No place ever truly is. But it was different. People were beginning to trust again, or at least hope. I kept my head low, moving carefully, knowing that the victory we had achieved could easily slip through our fingers if we weren't vigilant. There was no telling where the remnants of Lucius's influence might lie, and Lena's disappearance only made me wonder what kind of game she was playing now. Still, I couldn't deny that there was something new in the air. The future was no longer as uncertain as it once seemed. There were possibilities, real possibilities, for change, and I was at the heart of it. Chapter 85. A Silent Visitor. It was one of those quiet nights when the city seems to hold its breath. I was sitting in my office, looking over documents, when a knock came at the door. The kind of knock that tells you something is wrong. I straightened, wiping the thoughts of Lena and Lucius from my mind. "Come in," I called. The door opened, and in stepped Marla, one of my most trusted allies, someone I had known since the early days of the fight against Lucius's reign. She was looking unusually tense. "I've got something, Jack," she said, her voice low. "You need to hear this." She handed me an encrypted device. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced at the flashing red lights. This wasn't just any message. This was urgent. I unlocked it, and the first thing that appeared was a grainy video, the image shaking as though it had been filmed in haste. A woman's face came into view, a face I recognized all too well. It was Lena. She was standing, in a dimly lit room, her eyes wide with fear, but not the kind of fear I had expected. It was a kind of raw desperation that made my blood run cold. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling, "and I need your help." Chapter 86. The Return of the Ghost. The words seemed to hang in the air like a question I wasn't prepared to answer. Lena had been gone for months. She had disappeared after everything had ended. The syndicate, Lucius, the city's reformation. She had vanished into the shadows, and I had assumed she was just another casualty of the game. But here she was, asking for my help. I replayed the message twice, then looked at Marla. Her expression mirrored mine, confused, cautious. "What do you think, Jack? Should we trust her?" I leaned back in my chair, considering. Trust had never been my strong suit, especially not when it came to Lena. But something in her voice, something raw and desperate, pulled at me. It wasn't the calculating woman I'd once known. It was the woman I had loved, the woman who had once shown vulnerability before it all had crumbled. But could I trust her? Could I afford to? "You know the rules," I said, finally meeting Marla's gaze. "No one is beyond redemption, but no one gets a second chance without proving. They deserve it." I stood, pulling on my coat. "Get me a location. We're meeting her." Chapter 87. The Meeting. The place Lena had instructed us to meet was an old, abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, a place that had once been used by Lucius's men as a holding spot for their supplies. It was isolated, dark, and far from prying eyes. I felt a strange sense of déjà vu as I approached the building. This was where it had all started. The shadows, the lies, the betrayals. And now, it seemed, it was where it would all come full circle. Marla and I approached the entrance cautiously, our senses heightened. We didn't know what to expect. Lena had always been unpredictable, and after all that had happened, I couldn't help but wonder what game she was playing now. We entered, the heavy air thick with dust and decay. I couldn't see her at first, just the distant echo of our footsteps on the concrete floor. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Lena. She looked different. Her hair was darker, shorter. Her face was tired, older, marked by the strain of whatever she had been through. But there was still that same fire in her eyes, the same fire that had always drawn me to her and terrified me. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Why should I?" I replied, my tone guarded. "You've made it pretty clear where your loyalties lie." Her face tightened, and for a moment I thought she might say something more. But instead, she just stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been trying to undo what I did, Jack. I've been trying to take down the real enemy." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "Lucius isn't dead. Not really. He faked his death, and he's been pulling the strings from the shadows, trying to take back what he lost." My heart raced. "You're telling me he's still alive?" She nodded. "He's been working through a network of loyalists. They've been rebuilding the syndicate." The moment the words hit my ears, I felt the weight of the world shift. Lucius. He was here, in this moment. The chaos we had feared was upon us. Everything I had fought for, everything I had sacrificed, all led up to this single, breathless moment. My brother-in-law's voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with realization. He had made his choice. There was no backing out. He had already crossed the point of no return. "Jack, you need to listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "It's not just Lucius. He's got people inside the city's security, inside. Every safe house we've been using, he's been watching us, waiting." I didn't have time for his hesitation. We had prepared for this, but I could feel it in my gut. This wasn't just an ordinary fight. Lucius was everywhere. And if we failed here, it would be the end of everything. "Stay safe," I said, cutting him off. "We're coming in." Chapter 97. The Ambush. We breached the warehouse doors only to be met with the roar of gunfire. It was a trap. They had anticipated our move, and they had set the stage to destroy us. The flash of muzzle fire illuminated the darkened space, and I ducked behind a pillar, my heart hammering in my chest. "Move!" I barked to my team. "Get to cover!" I could hear the chaos of the firefight unfolding around me, shouts, the crack of bullets ricocheting, the sharp exhale of breath. I had been in battles before, but this felt different. The intensity, the precision of Lucius's men. They were everywhere. Marla, ever the strategist, was already relaying orders over the comms, directing the team to flank the left side of the building. Lena was with me, her movements fluid, calculated. She was more than just an ally now. She was a partner, and I couldn't afford to lose her again. I moved fast, taking cover behind a stack of crates, my mind racing. Where was Lucius? He wasn't here with the front line. He was too clever for that. This was all a distraction. He was waiting for us to slip up, and then I saw it. Movement in the shadows at the far end of the warehouse. There, standing under the dim glow of a broken light, was Lucius. Calm, composed, almost as if the chaos around him was nothing more than a show. "You're too late, Jack," he called out, his voice cutting through the din of gunfire like a knife. "This city is mine. You never stood a chance." Chapter 98. The Confrontation. I didn't hesitate. I pushed forward, my feet pounding against the cold concrete as I made my way toward him. The sound of gunfire faded into the background as everything narrowed down to one singular burning objective: Lucius. He stood there, his face as cold and calculating as ever. The man who had once been the king of shadows, the puppet master pulling the strings from the dark corners of the world. "You're wrong, Lucius," I said, my voice steady despite the storm swirling around us. "You never understood this city, or the people in it. It's not about control, it's about freedom, and that's something you'll never take from us." He chuckled darkly, taking a slow step forward, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous kind of amusement. "Freedom? You think they'll ever be free, Jack? Not while people like me exist. The world is built on power, and you're nothing more than a fleeting dream, maybe." "But I'm not done yet," I growled. Without warning, I lunged. The fight that ensued was brutal. Lucius was faster than I had anticipated, his movements fluid, almost predatory. He fought with the precision of a man who had been in countless battles, a man who had long ago stopped caring about the cost of victory. We traded blows, each one harder than the last. I felt my body begin to ache with every punch, every kick. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. And then, as if the universe itself was playing its cruel hand, a gunshot rang out. Chapter 99. The Shocking Betrayal. Froze, my body tensing as the sound of the bullet echoed through the warehouse. My mind screamed, "No!" But it wasn't Lucius who had fired. I turned just in time to see my brother-in-law standing there, his gun raised, aimed directly at me. "No!" I shouted, disbelieving. You sold us out!" His face was unreadable, his eyes cold. "You never understood, Jack. You never saw the bigger picture. This city, this war, it's all part of something much larger. Lucius offered me a place at the top. I couldn't refuse. I thought I could control it, but now it's too late. And you're in my way." I could hardly breathe. My own flesh and blood was standing there, the very man I had trusted, the one I had always considered family, pointing a gun at me, ready to take everything from me. But I wasn't going down like this. "You're wrong," I spat. "You're nothing but a coward, a pawn in a game you'll never win." His finger tightened on the trigger. I didn't wait. I dove. The bullet flew past me, missing by inches as I crashed into him, knocking him to the ground. The moment of impact was almost surreal. The warehouse seemed to hold its breath as Lena and I closed in on Lucius, our resolve locked in place. This was it. The final reckoning, the end of a long war that had left nothing but scars in its wake. No more shadows. No more secrets. Lucius stood there, his grin widening as he saw us approach. But it wasn't the arrogance of victory in his eyes. No, it was something darker. Calculation. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. "Do you honestly believe you've won?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "This city, this world, it's mine. I have always been 2 steps ahead, Jack. You're a fool if you think you can change anything." His words stung, but they didn't reach me. I wasn't the same man who had first tangled with him. I wasn't the same fool anymore. Maybe I said, the weight of my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. But I'm not playing your game anymore. Lena was by my side, her gun trained on his chest, the cold steel of her gaze as unforgiving as mine. We moved swiftly, no more hesitation. The entire building seemed to tremble under the force of our steps, the air heavy with the promise of an end. Chapter 103. The Final Betrayal. Then it happened. There was a flicker, a small but telling movement in the shadows, a faint rustle of fabric behind me. My instincts screamed at me just a split second too late. The trap. It had never been about just Lucius. The final betrayal. I turned, but it was too late. My brother-in-law had circled back, and his weapon was already raised. The barrel glinted under the harsh light. This time there was no hesitation in his eyes. No doubt. The betrayal that had already been carved deep into my soul now burned hotter, searing through my chest. He had sold us out. He had sold me out. Again. I didn't have time to process the hurt, the weight of the crushing reality. There was no room for feeling. There was only one thing to do. I moved instinctively. Chapter 104. The Desperate Fight. The bullet rang out before I had fully processed the movement. A sharp, sickening pain. The world exploded into chaos around me, everything blurring as I felt. The searing heat of the wound tear through my side. But I didn't fall. I couldn't fall. Lena reacted instantly, her gun snapping toward my brother-in-law, but in the confusion, a figure emerged from the shadows. A third party, an unseen player in the game, pulling her back, subduing her with lightning speed. Could hear her scream as she fought against the hold, but her struggle was useless. I was alone. Lucius's voice came from the darkness, his laugh cruel and triumphant. "You were never going to win, Jack. Not in this game. You're nothing but a pawn." His voice was cold, the finality of his words suffocating. "You should have stayed away." I staggered, blood pouring down my side, my vision swimming. But I refused to give in. The fight wasn't over, not yet. I reached for my weapon, but my body felt heavy, numb, the world narrowing as I took one more step toward Lucius. Chapter 105. The Unseen Player. But then the unexpected happened. From the shadows emerged a figure I didn't recognize. Tall, masked, and silent. They moved with an uncanny fluidity, a presence that seemed almost supernatural. The newcomer stepped between me and Lucius, their movements precise, calculated. For the briefest moment, I thought my vision was playing tricks on me, but the figure was real. "You don't need to die today, Jack," the figure spoke, their voice muffled but unmistakably firm. "This isn't your fight anymore." I didn't have the strength to argue, but I understood. This wasn't about me. This wasn't about Lucius. This was a game of fate, and this mysterious figure had just rewritten the rules. Lucius's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he sneered. "You think you can stop me?" The figure didn't flinch. Instead, they turned toward me, their eyes revealed. For a fleeting second had an unsettling glimmer of recognition. "I'm here to make sure you live," they said. And in a flash, they turned back to Lucius, the weapon in their hands flashing with precision as they closed the gap. The clash that followed was brutal. The figure fought with incredible speed and ferocity, taking down Lucius's guards one by one. But Lucius wasn't an easy adversary. He fought back with ruthless determination, using everything he had learned over the years. Chapter 106. The death of a King Lucius's arrogance began to unravel with every blow that landed. And in the end, it was the figure who struck the final blow. With one swift motion, Lucius was on the ground, his life force fading beneath the weight of his own hubris. He had underestimated the unseen player, just as he had underestimated all of us. It was over. Lucius was no longer a threat, but as the silence fell, I realized something that left me breathless. The mysterious figure turned toward me once more, their eyes now filled with something I couldn't place. Pity? Regret? The weeks that followed Lucius's downfall were not what I expected. In the immediate aftermath, there was chaos, a vacuum where the criminal underworld once thrived. The city's air, once thick with fear and uncertainty, seemed to clear just slightly, but only enough for us to see that there were still forces at play in the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, even though Lucius was gone. Who had been pulling the strings behind him? The figure who had saved me? The one who had appeared out of nowhere had left more questions than answers. There was something off about it all, something that didn't sit right. Lena had been with me every step of the way, her loyalty unwavering. But even she seemed uneasy, the burden of everything that had transpired weighing heavily on her shoulders. There were days when I would catch her staring into the distance, lost in thought, as if she too was trying to piece together the puzzle of the city's future. "We need to find out who's really behind all of this," Lena said one evening, her voice low as we sat in my apartment, watching the rain streak against the windows. Lucius was only a pawn. There's something bigger, something we missed. I nodded, knowing she was right. But I also knew that digging deeper meant risking everything we had fought for. The syndicate was shattered, but it wasn't gone. And there was still a dark undercurrent, running through the city, one that could sweep us all away if we weren't careful. Chapter 110. The first clue. I couldn't sleep that night. The shadows felt different now, more oppressive, as though something was waiting to descend upon us at any moment. I pushed the thought aside, trying to focus on something, anything else. But the weight of the unknown gnawed at me, driving me out of bed. I grabbed my jacket, knowing I wouldn't be able to rest until I had some answers. Lena was right. We couldn't just sit back and wait for the storm to find us. I went to the old safe house where we'd once gathered our intel, a dimly lit, abandoned building tucked away in one of the city's forgotten corners. The place was quiet, but it was always full of memories, the kind you tried not to dwell on when the stakes were so high. I was alone. The others were scattered, trying to stabilize the city's fragile peace. As I made my way through the dim corridors, something caught my eye, a faint glimmer of paper on the floor. I bent down and picked it up, the weight of it sending a shiver down my spine. It was a map, and not just any map, a map of the city's underbelly, beneath the streets, beneath the surface of everything we had fought for. There were markings on it, unfamiliar, cryptic symbols, some of them crossed out, others circled in red. But it was the name written in the corner that stopped my heart. The Architects. Chapter 111. The Architects, I had heard whispers about them. Rumors of a shadow organization that operated in the deepest corners of the world, pulling the strings of even the most powerful criminal empires. But no one had ever dared to speak their name out loud, not in a way that was concrete, not in a way that held weight. The Architects. They were the unknown force that had been moving pieces around the board for decades. And now, it seemed, they were the ones who had been controlling Lucius all along. I knew I had to find out more. This wasn't just a fight for control of the city anymore. It was about something much larger. This was a war of shadows. I studied the map for hours, trying to decode the symbols, trying to make sense of it all. But there was something more, something hidden behind the surface, a pattern I couldn't quite grasp. My mind raced as I flipped through old files, connecting dots, trying to figure out where the Architects had their hands in everything we'd uncovered. But then, a cold voice interrupted my thoughts. "You've come a long way, Jack." I turned, sharply, instinctively reaching for my gun, but the figure in the doorway stopped me before I could react. It was her, the mysterious figure, the one who had saved me. She was standing there, illuminated by the dim glow of the room, her eyes unreadable beneath the dark fabric of her hood. I had never gotten a clear look at her face, but I felt like I knew her somehow. Had she been watching us the entire time? "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice hoarse, my gun still in my hand. She raised her hands, as if in surrender, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "I think you already know." I shook my head. "I don't." "But you've been involved in this from the beginning, haven't you?" She didn't flinch. "Not in the way you think. I'm not your enemy, Jack. But if you want answers, you'll have to trust me." My grip on the gun loosened just slightly. "Why should I?" "Because," she replied, her voice soft yet firm, "the architects are coming for you. They've been watching you, waiting, and you've just stumbled upon the first part of their plan." The rain had stopped, but the city still felt wet, as though it were holding its breath. The streets glistened under the soft glow of the streetlights, but I could see beyond the reflections, beyond the false sense of peace. Something dark was rising. The masked figure, whose name I still didn't know, had vanished as swiftly as she'd appeared. I was left with nothing but the ominous weight of her words. "You're the key to stopping them." It felt impossible. Unbelievable. How could I, a man who had barely made it out alive on more than one occasion, suddenly become the one to take down an organization so vast, so all-encompassing? The architects. I needed answers, and there was only one place to start. The old contacts, those who had been around long before I ever knew what the syndicate was, before my life had been turned upside down by ambition, greed, and betrayal. Lena was the first person I reached out to. Even after everything we'd been through, I trusted her more than anyone. She had been there from the start, through all, the bloodshed and loss. We met at a quiet cafe, a place we frequented before everything had gone to hell. The soft hum of conversation around us felt alien in comparison to the chaos that had become our lives. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Lena said, as she slid into the seat opposite me, her voice tinged with concern. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, as if she could read the turmoil on my face. "You don't know the half of it," I muttered, running my fingers through my hair. "Lena, there's something I didn't tell you. Something bigger than Lucius. Bigger than all of this." She leaned forward, her gaze narrowing. "What do you mean?" "The architects," I said, barely able to force the words from my throat. "They're the ones behind everything. Lucius, all of it. They've been controlling everything from the shadows, and they're coming for us, for me." Lena's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered with recognition. She'd been involved in enough of the underworld to know that names like the architects weren't to be taken lightly. "So, what do we do?" she asked, her voice steady like she was already preparing for war. "We can't just sit back and wait for them to make their move." I looked down at the map I had stolen from the safe house. The cryptic markings still haunted me, and I realized how little I truly understood. But there had to be something hidden within it. I had to keep digging, keep moving. Chapter 115. The Hidden Path. The city's underbelly had always been a maze, full of hidden doors and forgotten passageways. I knew the old tunnels, the forgotten alleyways that had once served as the arteries for illicit trade, the lifeblood of the syndicate. It was there I'd find answers. But I also knew it wasn't going to be easy. Lena and I split up. She'd handle the surface, the political side of things, gathering intel from those who still had connections to the old regime, those who might know about the architects' involvement in all of this. And I I was going underground, I ventured, to the tunnels beneath the city, a place I had hoped to leave behind. But there was no turning back now. Every step I took echoed in the vast, empty space around me. The damp smell of decay filled the air, but beneath it was something else. The faint whisper of power. As I moved deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels, I thought I saw something flicker in the shadows. A figure, cloaked and hooded, moving just beyond my line of sight. I wasn't alone. Chapter 116. The Silent Witness. I wasn't surprised when the figure approached me. Whoever they were, they had been following me, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The flicker of recognition passed between us, though I couldn't place them. Another player in this game. You've come looking for answers, the figure said, their voice distorted slightly by the darkness. But answers are costly, Jack. I tightened my grip on the gun at my side, instinctively drawing it. Who? Are you? The figure laughed, low and amused. You should already know, but I suppose you wouldn't be standing here if you did. The figure moved closer, and I could now make out the faint outline of a mask, similar to the one the mysterious woman wore. I'm a spectator, a silent witness to the chaos, but I've seen enough to know that you don't have much time left. What do you mean? I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. The figure's hands came up, almost in mock surrender. The architects are far more than you think, Jack. They've already infiltrated the highest echelons of power. Your fight will be with more than just criminals. A chill ran through me. Who else is involved? The figure paused, their eyes glinting beneath the mask. There are people in this city, people who you think are your allies, who have already made deals with them. The city's so-called leaders? They're nothing but puppets.